I'm Joseph. This is Input English. Yesterday I took a long trip down to the coast of the Pacific Ocean and made a lot of videos. I had way too much footage to put it together as one video. It would have been too long and it would have been different locations and different themes. So when I make these videos, I want them to be a reasonable size so I don't test your attention span. I also want them to be fairly cohesive. I don't want them to be disjointed. So if I say something is cohesive, its components stick together. If something is disjointed, that means it's not connected. It's not related. So in the name of not having disjointed episodes and striving to make these episodes more cohesive, I broke them up into logical episodes. This division of the video footage was done in post-production. That is, it was done on the computer once I had returned home and had dinner. So owing to that, there was no introduction for the part of my journey that visited the old buildings of the Wilder Ranch. So that's what I'd like to offer you now. Visiting this old ranch had a lot of benefits to us. First of all, it gives you a glimpse of what it looked like over 100 years ago in Northern California. This used to be a working ranch. They had livestock. They had people working, raising food, raising cattle. Another benefit to us is that location offers up its own vocabulary. There are a lot of things and activities that we could talk about that give you a lot of expressions in context, which will be useful to you. So I offer that you relax and enjoy a nice walk through the old buildings of the Wilder Ranch. These are poppies. These are California poppies. They are the state flower of California. You can see two varieties here, the bright yellow and orange ones, and then the more orange ones behind. Those are just variations in the poppy. Here we have some cactus. The plural of cactus is cacti. These are very old ones. You can see that a lot of the cactus here are dead or very old and gnarled. Here's some younger foliage. This patch of cactus probably dates back to when this was a working ranch. The fruit of cactus is frequently edible. There's also a dish in Mexican cuisine called nopales, and that is the ear or the leaf of a cactus that has been prepared as food. So these plants were likely a source of food, at least somewhat a source of food, back when this was a working ranch. Now, right now I'm in search of water. Kind of true to form, I embarked on this trip ill-prepared. So I did not lay in any water supply. So I'm hoping that I'll find some place where I can get something to drink. That's my next goal, getting something to drink. Well, it appears that I have found some water. Well, not really. So this is not likely potable water. It's water, but it's probably not safe to drink, and I can't see a way to actually get any water out of this. This is for the fire department in case of a fire. I've been looking at these buildings from the original ranch. They're beautiful, they're old, and they're locked. So the sign on the big house explained that they do give tours on Saturdays here, but they just don't have the staff to have these buildings open during the week and provide people with access. I see the big farmhouse behind me, and then I see several other buildings, barns. And that one, the door is open, so I think it's time to go in there and take a look at what it has to offer. This park has a lot of old equipment hanging around. This is an old sawmill. You can see the saw blade and the frame. You can see that the frame is set so that this portion of the machine would move. Now it's all rusted, and I don't think for a minute it would move now, but it would move so that you could put lumber on this surface here, and then by the expediency of moving this platform back and forth, you could cross-cut that. This looks like it's set up for cross-cut. This is very thin steel, and then below it is wood. And this is a big flywheel, which would store torque in this machine so that if you put a load on it, it wouldn't just immediately stop. This device here, where the shaft meets the frame, is called a pillow block. And on top of it, there is a place to put lubricant. There's a reservoir to add oil, because that's an area of great friction if it's not adequately lubricated. It appears that the way this was probably run is they would put a big flat belt, perhaps made out of leather, around this big flywheel, and then they would hook that up to a machine, either a steam engine or a gasoline engine, in order to provide power to this device. Over next to the saw, there's another pillow block and another way to lubricate that bearing as well. This device to the left is a pump, and it's set next to this, but I'm not sure if they were ever connected. Here we have a small bird, and I have trouble identifying what those are, whether it is a swallow or a swift. I think it's a barn swallow. If I've made an error, I will correct it in the comment section. But that small bird makes nests in places like this. And it's amazing how docile that creature is, just sitting there while I film this. I am about 4 feet away from that bird. I find that pretty amazing. So we're inside this barn, very low light conditions. This barn has multiple purposes. You can see a couple of carriages, vintage carriages. And I don't know if these pertain to the original family or if they're in here for display. I just don't know that. I don't stipulate that I know that. This is an area where an animal, ostensibly a horse or a cow, would get access to pasture. But I don't see what kind of creature it is. We do have a lot of these birds. I think they're barn swallows. Pretty fascinating. Here's a place where cats are given a place to stay. There's food, there are some beds. And I ran into one of the cats here earlier. Knowing that this was a working ranch, I find this fascinating because each of these marks, each of these things that you see, each of these features happened for a reason. I construe that these marks on the top rail here likely happened because the teeth of a horse or another animal came into contact with it. Probably a horse chewed on this. These are very old fittings made by a blacksmith. It's tethered on the inside with a lock so that we can't open it. But this is the original work of a blacksmith. These boards here have been worn by many decades of foot traffic, much wear. There were a couple of things over here that puzzled me. Adjacent to this wall, there are a bunch of dents in the wood. And I'm wondering if maybe some sort of tool was historically placed here. This feature completely puzzles me. There's a hole, and I don't know what that is. I'm wondering if maybe it was chewed by rodents. This shelf was put in by someone for some reason to hold something. Part of the history of this place. We can't know everything. Here we see some sheep and some goats. Lots of signs that we're not supposed to feed these animals. That makes sense. You can hear Highway 1 just beyond this location with lots of highway traffic sounds. I had no idea how close this Wilder Ranch was to the highway. It's right here. I hear the sounds of chickens. I see a chicken coop. A chicken coop is a pen, an enclosure for chickens. It has two jobs. A chicken coop is to keep the chickens where you can control them, but chicken coops are also best if they can prevent predators from killing your chickens. The last thing you want is to grow chickens and then have them become food for predators like foxes or coyotes. So this is a chicken coop. And it's full of chickens. Well, it's not full, it contains some chickens. So you can hear the chickens in there making their chicken sounds. It looks like this is pretty well set up with sturdy wire to prevent predation. And the other thing that I found here is super precious. I have found a very aggressive drinking fountain. I can certainly get a drink of water, but I can also probably take a shower at the same time. It looks very aggressive. This barn has a lot of vintage farm implements. On the left is an old tractor, very rusty. This is a sickle bar. The whole device is called a sickle bar. It's pulled behind either a horse or a tractor. And the business end of it is that vertical thing. That is the sickle bar itself. And when this is working, that feature is lowered to where it is parallel with the ground. Power is obtained from the spinning of these wheels and is transmitted to that to make the teeth go back and forth and cut the hay. So a sickle bar is used for mowing. It's a mowing device. Here's a plow. You can see it's asymmetrical. This would have been pulled by a horse or an ox or a tractor. Behind it is a baler, and that, once the hay has been cut and dried, this device will pack it into bricks called hay bales. And this is the end where the hay bales would be ejected and land on the ground so that they could be gathered, stacked, and stored. Here we have another sickle bar, another beyond that. That's a seeder on the other side. That is a device for putting seeds onto the ground or into the ground. So these are old farm implements. Here we're in an orchard. These are fruit trees. All around me are fruit trees. I don't know what kind. In our area, the cherry trees have already put out their blossoms, and so I would surmise that these are a different type of fruit tree, but I don't know what they are. The signs don't say, but there's some sort of fruit tree. There's more than a dozen of them here. And an orchard would be an important thing to have on a working ranch. After all, you have a lot of mouths to feed and you want to provide wholesome food. So what could be better than fruit from a fruit tree? The advantage of having fruit trees is pretty obvious. The fruit, while it's on the tree, doesn't spoil. It doesn't rot. It just continues to grow and get better until it gets to a certain stage. At some point, fruit like apples will simply fall off the tree. And in a place like this, you typically won't find any apples at the bottom of the tree because they've all been eaten by the deer in the area. Years ago, I was in South Dakota on a big ranch, and I explored and I found an area on the ranch that was a previous homestead. It had a foundation, what was left of a fireplace, the steps, a few fence posts, but really nothing of the house was left except for those vestiges, those little bits. But in the side yard of that old homestead, there was an old apple tree. And the apple tree had apples on it. It didn't have any leaves because we were there in the winter. So the leaves had all fallen off, but the apples were still on the tree. And the curious thing, there was not one apple on the ground below that. Because as soon as an apple falls off a tree out in the wilderness like that or out in nature, the first thing that happens is word gets out to the deer, there's an apple on the ground, and it quickly disappears. On the top of the barn, you can see a weather vane. The little device on the top is in the shape of a horse. They come in all sorts of different shapes. Sometimes they're just an arrow, but they indicate wind direction. They don't indicate wind speed, just a direction. So if you look at a weather vane, you can tell if the wind is coming out of the south or coming out of the north. And it's common to have a weather vane on a barn like this. Often the weather vane is hooked up to a ground. That is, there's a rod driven into the ground and a cable is run from that grounding rod up to the weather vane, because oftentimes a weather vane is also a lightning rod. The owner of a barn does not want his or her barn destroyed by a lightning strike. And so frequently they are protected by lightning rods, and the lightning rod may have a weather vane on top of it. As we look at this barn in front of us, you can see we were in that barn. It was the dark footage that you saw. And then above, there are a couple of windows. And you can infer that that is a hayloft. That second story of that barn was most likely used to store fodder. They would open a large door. It looks like there is a large door that they can lower with a pulley and a cable. They open that up and then they load the hay into the end of that hayloft. Then during the winter months, they can feed the animals with that fodder. So this is an old John Deere. You can see it's a Model A. It's a vintage tractor. It only has one wheel in the front, which makes it a little dangerous that it could fall over. There's a large wheel here that is useful for power takeoff. You can hook a strap over that, a big belt, a big leather belt, and you can use this to drive different machines. This is an old McCormick Deering, and it has a hand crank on the front. You could start this by cranking it by hand. Not easy, but we had a couple of tractors when we lived in Sacramento that you would start with a hand crank. This wall is super old. You can see at the bottom it's made with stones, and the stones are laid with either mud, maybe clay containing mud, perhaps lime cement, but it's so dark. And then it's covered with a plaster. The final surface was either painted or whitewashed. As you get up into this area, you have some bricks, and then this suggests adobe. There are other sections here that appear to be made of adobe. And I am construing that this is a new construction, and this is a brace to prevent this wall from falling over, probably put in by the Park Service. This is modern concrete poured into forms. But that looks like an adobe and stone wall. This little garden area has a bunch of fun things. This type of plant here that you see is called a calla lily. Yeah, this, I think this is the oldest building in the ranch. This barn, this little barn building looks like it's made mostly of adobe, and I bet you it's the oldest part of the ranch. But alas, there's no one here to ask. Nobody to talk to. The advantage of coming here on a weekday is you're not competing for space with throngs of people. Parks that are open mostly on the weekends can be super busy on the weekends, and it may test your patience. But on a weekday like this, it's pretty quiet, but there's nobody around to talk to either. After leaving Wilder Ranch, I was able to get some lunch in the town of Pescadero, and then I went on to 2 other locations to create more videos. Those will be available to you shortly. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.